But yeah, I healed quickly. That is
Mm.
where my view on nutrition and human nutrition and, I would say species specific diet really changed because I had been suffering with anxiety since I was 12, since I was diagnosed with anorexia and was hospitalized. I had been suffering bouts of depression, to the point of suicidal ideation, periods throughout my life. I'd had to get help and do some other things. And, I was I was not probably at a point where I could, sit and calmly and speak clearly like I am, very, very wrapped up and anxious, very, successful, very high strung. But the first thing I noticed, the first positive effect of changing my eating was my muscle pain pretty much disappeared within a week. And while I was grateful, I was also a little skeptical because I was like, oh, well, I'm not ready. Of course, my body's going to feel better.
Hi there, and welcome to another video. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, and welcome to another sort of version of success story. We've got the wonderful Michelle here, the dietitian's dilemma. It resonates very much with me. So, hi, Michelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
That's okay. It's a real pleasure. And I'm really excited because a lot of your story resonates with me. But I'm going to start with a little bit of blurb from your excellent book, okay? Because it
Thank you.
says, after years of a high carbohydrate diet, that's me, intense running sessions, me, then it doesn't sound like me, struggling with an eating disorder and feeling the throes of anxiety and depression, Michelle knew she needed to make a change. So I don't know when that was. When was that?
Yeah, I made my transition to a low carb diet in 2019. So that's kind of when I had my kind of one of my I'd say my pretty low point in my adult life.
Right. Okay. So that's pretty similar to me. Mine was when I got to age 50, but that was 8 years ago. So um, you've got the book's title there, The Dietitian's Dilemma. So how long have you been a dietitian, and why is it a dilemma?
Yeah, so I became a dietitian in 2009. So I practiced in the clinical setting for almost 11 years, and you go into the profession thinking like, I'm going to help people. I've learned all these things about nutrition. We're taught the standard American guidelines, telling people to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, all these quote unquote healthy whole grains. And in my experience, and my patients just weren't getting better. You kind of see the revolving door of people coming back in, someone with type 2 diabetes, and now their A1C is worse, then they have to have an amputation, and they have heart disease, then they have kidney failure. And, we're told as dietitians, like, oh, it's just these patients aren't following the guidelines. And so, it really kind of puts the blame on the patient as opposed to really analyzing, do these guidelines actually work? Are they really designed for human physiology? And that was the dietitian's dilemma because, I just started, like I wasn't really seeing people get better. And of course, I know in American healthcare, as healthcare all over the world, we have such a high clientele, right? We have so many patients we're supposed to see in a day. And I also noticed I just wasn't having time. Like you get 5 or 10 minutes with people, then you have to chart. And so it was kind of this overwhelming, ridiculous system. But, like I said, in 2019, I was actually trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So I was training really hard. And that's when my personal health fell apart. I was eating 300, almost 400 grams of carbohydrates a day. And these were whole food sources for the most part, oats, potatoes, rice, and keeping my fat and protein relatively low. And my body just stopped recovering well. And all these blood tests done, everything was normal, and reached out to a few sports dietitians. And they told me like, hey, look, you need to eat more carbohydrates. I was like, wow, okay, I'll try that. And it went from bad to worse. I was having cold sweats. I would go on a 2 mile run. I used to run 10 miles. I mean, we're talking 20 kilometers easily. And I was, I was having to walk back. I was having stomach pain. I was driving somewhere and I started to break out in a cold sweat. Gosh, my anxiety, I struggled with lifelong anxiety. It went from bad to panic attacks. I had to call it work. And, like I've said on a few other podcasts, my kind of the end, I thought it was going to be end of my running career. Came home from work. We had a pretty tough day in the hospital. I covered oncology. We had a younger patient pass away. So just, tough day, came home, actually fell asleep early on the couch. And then I woke up and everything hurt. And I think a lot of people come to this point in their health. They don't know what to do. It's like, I've tried everything. You know, a lot of people with type 2 diabetes, they're told it's a progressive disease. It just gets worse. And people with heart failure, oh, you're just going to have, stents and surgeries and statins. And so here I am though, in my living room, and it just felt like my body was on fire and I had no answers. I had tried what I thought was the right way to eat. I had used, over the counter pain meds. I'd used prescription pain meds. I'd used alcohol. I used a few other things. And so, yeah, at that moment, I drove to 7-Eleven and got 30 pounds of ice and 2 a.m. Just put it in the bathtub. I was taking an ice bath and just crying. And that's when, my partner came in and said, hey, maybe it's time to do something different. And I was like, yeah, that's it. I'm done. I'm too old. I'm 36. I said, I'm too old to be chasing these running dreams. And I said, you know what? I thought at that point, like, I'm never going to run again. And the next day, I remember thinking, well, if I'm not going to run, maybe I will reduce my carbohydrate intake. But it was so indoctrinated in me, being a dietitian and, for every condition, certainly someone, like you said, I've had a history of a pretty serious eating disorder. You can't certainly eliminate carbohydrates. But I kind of just had this intuitive sense that they didn't make me feel well. And so, yeah, I decided at that point I would try a ketogenic diet. And of course, in researching that, you stumbled upon the carnivore diet. And of course, I got excited. I was like, you know what? Well, first I thought this is nuts, as most people do, an all meat, animal-based protein diet, eliminating fruits, vegetables, grains. But then I, kind of took it a step beyond that. I was curious. And I think sometimes we have to really kind of hit a low point. Certainly was hitting a low point in my physical and mental health to say like, okay, well, I see these people doing this and they look pretty happy and I'm not happy. I'm clearly not healthy. And so, I reached out to a few people in the community and just kind of shared what was going on. And a couple of people were really helpful. Sarah Kleiner, Carnivore Yogi, Ade Fox, the Black Carnivore, like really, gave me a few tips and pointers. And so I decided, yeah, I'm going to do this. I want to do this for 30 days. Let's give it a try. And of course, my partner was like, no, this is a terrible idea. You're going to make you sick. It's eating disorder and all that, And I, for some reason, I don't even know why, but I felt very convicted. And I know part of it was I was really convinced my body needed more protein. Like I knew I wasn't feeling well. And so I just said, let me just try this for 30 days. Like, let's try it for, and she basically was like, all right, do whatever you want. This is not going to last a week. And, the transition was tough initially because, obviously I'm going from eating a very high amount of carbohydrates to low. And so had a lot of, and of course, I kind of bumbled through it. I would encourage anybody doing it to do some research, get your electrolytes, potentially work with a health coach. I didn't take any electrolytes for a while and I just had these headaches and, figured that out and take electrolytes. But yeah, I healed quickly. That is where my view on nutrition and human nutrition and, I would say a species specific diet really changed because I had been suffering with anxiety since I was 12, since I was diagnosed with anorexia and was hospitalized. I had been suffering bouts of depression to the point of suicidal ideation periods throughout my life. I'd had to get help and do some other things. And, I was I was not probably at a point where I could, sit and calmly and speak clearly like I am, very, very wrapped up and anxious, very, successful, very high strung. But the first thing I noticed, the first positive effect of changing my eating was my muscle pain pretty much disappeared within a week. And while I was grateful, I was also a little skeptical because I was like, oh, well, I'm not ready. Of course, my body's going to feel better. But then I clearly remember being at work and I was still working in the clinic as a dietitian and, it was me and 3 other women. And, in the morning, everybody's got oatmeal and bagels and I'm coming, with this big bowl of beef and that's so different. Like, it's not super popular and the two were vegetarian. So they were just like, oh my God, what are you doing? But I remember I was actually in a meeting with, several health professionals and a dietitian that I worked with. It's kind of like getting shaky and antsy. And she had looked over at me and said, hey, do you need a snack? Like, I'm going to go get a snack. And it was like, hey, Christy, I'm fine. We'll eat at noon when it's, we'll eat at lunch. And she said, Michelle, it's almost 2. And at that point, I'd never gone that long without eating. I was someone who always had a granola bar, had a snack, had a sugary coffee. I was constantly riding that blood sugar roller coaster, my whole life. And certainly I'd been an athlete for so many years. I was just told, you need to be eating all the time. And I remember at that moment thinking like, wow, like I'm not hungry. Like I just feel calm. It was really interesting. I noticed my attitude shifted. I was not as irritated by little life stuff like traffic and just life. I felt more calm. But it was that about 3 weeks I came home from work and my partner was sitting on the couch and asked me, she said, hey, can you come here? I need to talk to you. And one, she was home early from work, which is odd. And two, you always worry like, oh my God, did somebody die? What happened? And she literally just said like, I don't know what's going on. And I don't know if I like how you're eating, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you.
Wow.
And we both just kind of like, stared at each other. Like, what is going on? This is, I mean, it was really incomprehensible for something so quickly. And then also, we're like, okay, well, is this temporary? Is this going to be sustainable? And that's what led to, okay, well, we need to do a bunch of research. She's a scientist, I'm a dietitian. And so, I had access working in the hospital to, all kinds. You have access, the hospital library to clinical trials, and I was shocked how many clinical trials there are specifically on like ketogenic diets, specifically for, diabetes, insulin, sensitivity, for diabetes reversal. So, Dr. Eric Westman was the first doctor that introduced me to the research on how thoroughly tested ketogenic diets are, because people say, oh, it's a fad. Dietitians were told, that's a fad. It'll kill your heart. You'll die. And they're the most studied diet of any diet out there. I mean, vegetarian, Mediterranean, standard American, ketogenic diets, there's more clinical trials showing their safety, their efficacy, and their sustainability. And, and recently we just had Dr. Sethi Shamani and Chris Palmer publish a clinical, study on 3 people with lifelong binge eating disorder that had complete remission of symptoms. And we're seeing that with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And so, I mean, but this was clearly the opposite of everything I even thought. And so I was, you're scared, you're angry, you feel all the gamut of emotions. I've spent my whole life learning this. And I've also spent my whole life suffering, with what I was told would be lifelong anxiety. And of course it's not a perfect journey, right? There certainly is no way of eating that's going to fix your life. You've got to, work through and deal with your stuff. But I found, that by consuming a diet very high in animal products, specifically for me, a lot of the ruminant animals, we eat a lot of beef. I would eat more lamb, and my partner liked lamb, but specifically a lot of beef and liver really dramatically improved my health. And so that's where the book came in. It's like, what do you do? Because my hope was, awesome. I've saved my health. I have this pile of research showing how effective it is. Now I'm going to teach it. Now I'm going to help heal people. And I was kind of immediately pulled aside in the hospital, like, whoa, glad you're feeling good. But no, you cannot teach this here. You cannot talk about it. You cannot, this needs to stay. This needs to stay, if you want to talk about it with your, friends or whatever, but you cannot talk to patients or anybody else in the hospital. This is against our care guidelines. And that was very disheartening to me. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So now I felt like I'm literally being told, okay, you have a diabetic patient, you have tools that can help them with this low carb diet, but you cannot teach it. You must go teach them a diet that will keep them sick. And ethically, that did not feel right.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I know you don't know me very well, but actually I'm a specialist practitioner in obesity and diabetes in the UK. And that's what I was trying to say to you earlier. And I've deliberately not spoken to you much because I wanted it to be a real conversation for people to see, because that is exactly my dilemma. And I can remember many, many years ago when I was doing the studying, being very chastised for continually putting my hand up And I tell you what, when I tell you the first question I asked, you'll go, well, that's an obvious question. I'd sat there for 3 or 4 days listening to how do you dose insulin? Well, basically, it's in relation to carbohydrates. And then we got to this bit about, extra carbohydrates, extra insulin. And I just put my hand up and said, look, shouldn't we just reduce the carbohydrates? Wow. Talk about the elephant in the room. It's like, wow, you cannot say that. And then
No.
it just, to me, it was a no-brainer, absolutely a no-brainer. And I did a thing with, you're talking about quick resolution. I've been doing a lot of success stories, and I went back after speaking to one person who had cranial winter pressure. They were going to do a brain surgery on her. They were going to put a stent into her brain, and 12 days of carnivore reversed it completely. 12 days.
Wow.
And I have people with, a lifetime of problems. Anyway, I went back to look at my textbooks, and they cover themselves. There are little passages about low carb throughout the textbook. There is, but you have to be really smart and switched on to spot that actually they're covering themselves, because I was the same as you. I realized, and certainly when I started getting diabetic patients actually in real life referred to me, the ones that were successful to a person was the ones that came to me and said, I've taken low carb on. I've seen, I know a lot of people don't like this person, but like Dr. Berg, for instance, I've seen Dr. Berg online and I went low carb and it's changed my life. I saw Dr. Berry, and I love the way you said you stumbled upon carnivore. These diabetic people, they weren't being told this by anyone with a white coat and a stethoscope or any of their nurse practitioners. They found it for themselves. And I was in the dilemma. I was in yeah, I agree with you, but I can't say it. And
it's really hard.
It's really hard. So, I wasn't giving you, the soft flannel to get you on. Your book totally and utterly resonated with me. And if anyone wants to know what it's like behind the scenes and how frustrating it is a fantastic book. It really is a fantastic book. But I will be chastised in the comments on YouTube if I don't pick up on a couple of things you said. And one was that you had anorexia when you were a child. I mean, has that completely gone? Your body image feelings of how's that resolved itself, or has it not still?
Yeah, I'm not sure it ever completely resolves itself, to be honest with you. I don't know. I mean, that's one thing I'm certainly not afraid to say too, is like there's certain things like I don't know. I think we need to say that more as health professionals, like as opposed to being like yes or no, we don't know. But it's much better. What my life, I was told even as a 12-year-old, and for some reference for people watching, I was almost 5 feet tall. Oh no, I always have to do this, and I forget where you guys do meters. 5 feet tall and 57.5 pounds. So I'm not sure how to do that in kilograms, but very, very, very sick. And I was told I would suffer with lifelong anxiety. And I often felt like I was standing on the sideline of my own life. I was dealing with chronic GI issues. I would feel very anxious around, eating situations. I was hungry all the time. I felt bloated and achy. And so, it was interesting to me that just kind of taking that period of time where I just ate so much meat and fat. And it wasn't like I didn't eat meat. I was only a vegetarian, very short period of my life for one point, but I was eating so much of the carbohydrates. And I don't think what a lot of people understand is carbohydrates have a lot of things called anti-nutrients in it. It's kind of like a weird buzzword, but things like fiber and phytic acid can actually bind to things like iron and zinc and calcium. And that doesn't mean I'm not a person who believes that all humans never need to eat carbohydrates. I'm an ultra runner. I think depending on your goals, I think most people can tolerate some whole food carbohydrates. The problem now is in society, we eat a massive amount of these, very ultra processed carbohydrates and very little amounts of animal protein. But the fact that I've noticed just, once again, I think my body and brain are finally fed, having had so much protein. And it's so much more than protein. I'm saying the word protein quite a bit, but I also, when I started feeling better and my anxiety was reduced and, I wanted to know why. And that's why I really kind of, contacted Chris Palmer. Him and I know him well now, and looked at the work of Georgia Ede. And I was just surprised for a couple of things. One, the brain really needs a lot of these vitamins and minerals and cofactors. So when I say that, I'm talking about, all the B vitamins and folate and zinc and all these things that we just really don't get in the quantities and proportions we need. It's not as simple as popping a vitamin pill. You know, your body needs and utilizes things synergistically, and that's very bioavailable. And the word bioavailable just meaning your body can use it in animal protein. And so, yeah, you know, it's not perfect. My life certainly isn't perfect, and there's certainly, you know, periods in my life where I struggle. But you know, if before, we'll say on a scale of like 1 to 10, 10 is great, and 1 is terrible. I'd say, well, before, you know, we're living at like a 6 to 7, or one is I don't know. So I said 1 is terrible, 10 is great. So it was closer to terrible. You know, it's closer to 3 to 4. And now I'd say most days we're closer to 8 to 9. So I'll take that every day of the week.
Yes. I know it's an odd question, but I just want to check with you actually, because a lot of my coaching, not a lot, but a percentage who are anorexic also become, you know, they start binge eating throughout. Did you have that happen to you as well at some point?
I never did. No, I was kind of the chronic restrictor, you know, and, you know, ultimately, you know, in the book too, there's a chapter on eating disorders. And I think, you know, unfortunately, how we treat eating disorders in, you know, our country, I'm sure in the UK is similar from what I understand, is pretty terrible. You know, the relapse rate is incredibly high. You know, it's over 50% of people will relapse. And they define relapse as like full on behaviors into treatment type thing. You know, I would estimate most people struggle with behaviors and thoughts and, you know, other it's just it dominates so much of your life. So, you know, my hypothesis and my proposal in the book is opposed to what happens in most recovery centers. And if you know, if you're not familiar, if you're dealing with, you're either super overweight or super underweight, you know, you're put into a recovery center and your standard American diet, or I'm guessing standard UK diet, it's, you know, you're
One
and it's just
size
so
fits all.
interesting. Yeah, and it's so interesting to me that I literally, I mean, I presented a study when one of the talks I did that like, and it's so dumb to me. I feel like sometimes we have to have a study, something my 6-year-old niece could tell you, that people with eating disorders have gastrointestinal damage, right? Like, no shit, you've been starving yourself or you've been binging and purging, your GI system is damaged. So asking someone with a damaged GI system to eat this diet that's very high in sugar, high in flour, and high in oils, and we wonder why they have anxiety and they're, you know, I was told by a doctor who he didn't know I had a history of an eating disorder. He just said, you know, everyone with eating disorders, they're just manipulative, they just lie. And I was like, wow, really? Like, that's your view? So my you know, if I had all the money in the world, I can started eating disorder treatment. And we do have some papers, you know, specifically with binge eating disorder. People do very well with these diets that are very low inflammatory, very high in animal protein, high in fat, very gentle on the GI system, and very high in those fat soluble vitamins that they've likely been restricting. You know, the goal being let's heal your system, let's give it all the nutrition it needs to heal, and and help your brain heal at the same time.
Right, cool. I mean, so I'm going to get into a little bit about practical tips. So, for instance, do you? Let's talk about you first. I mean, do you have like 2 meals a day? What does your day look like when you're eating?
Well, and keeping in mind, I'm an ultra runner too. So I'm somebody who runs just depending on, you know, how much I'm gearing up, you know, anywhere between an hour and up to 4 hours a day. So yeah, I'm probably eating a little bit more than the average human, but nah, I mean, I have most of the time will eat 3 meals, and sometimes even more if I'm trying to get in more calories. I found it, that's one thing that's a little bit can be challenging about a low carb or animal based diet, is it is so satiating. You know,
Yes.
that also, it's been a problem for someone like a distance athlete. You know, it's you know, a lot of the world. That's great. You know, we have so many people struggling with obesity and, you know, needing to eat less intake. And that's why I think it is so successful, obviously, with weight loss. But no, I usually eat, I generally don't eat much before I run, but I'll have a meal after I run, kind of a smaller mid meal. The after I run meals and the ending of the day meals tend to be the kind of the main meals. And they're usually just some type of animal protein, a lot of usually beef and butter, and then some type of carbohydrate. I do consume carbohydrates twice a day.
What's your carbohydrate source that you use?
It varies. You know, and people ask me, and I don't think there's no magical carbohydrate. I would tell people that, like, you, especially for my endurance athletes, I'm like, you know, you need to find what sits in your stomach, what works. I've done sometimes just white rice. We've done some sweet potatoes. My wife makes long fermented sourdough. I've kind of mixed it up. I don't really have one I totally
No.
enjoy. It's funny. I would prefer if it was up to me just not to eat carbohydrates. I still feel like they don't. I have to be careful. Like I'm very careful not to have, those concentrated sugars or sweets because I genuinely can notice an impact on my mood. But certainly for my running, I found a benefit for that to have some type of carbohydrate.
Do you think if you didn't run that you wouldn't require carbohydrates?
Yeah, I probably would have very little, I know
Mm.
my wife probably has 25 to 50 grams a day, usually a piece of fruit and something else,
Mhm.
I would probably join in that. Even when I first started back doing very easy runs, I was still pretty low carbohydrate. But I
Mhm.
found kind of over time that, because obviously, your body can do gluconeogenesis. It can make glucose through protein and lactate and other
Mhm.
derivatives. But I found that, man, when you're asking your body to do a lot, it seemed like that small amount really, it was kind of finding that, what is going to be enough to really support my running and help with that. But obviously, what's not too much to where I just feel like,
What distances are you running then?
So 50 miles. So I did a 100-kilometer race last June. So
Mhm.
62 miles. And it's my hope to do 100 miles. So I'm not sure exactly what that is in kilometers. What would that be? Like 150 kilometers ish,
Yeah,
maybe a little longer than that.
something like
So
that.
long races. A lot of time on your feet.
So, as you're an athlete, you see, I'm asking you questions I don't normally ask in success stories because people will comment. Do you suffer from cramps? And if you do, how do you resolve cramps?
That's actually funny you asked that because we were literally just talking earlier today. I was talking with somebody about electrolytes, and I wish there was just like this easy electrolyte dose. Like everybody just needs XXX amount, and we don't know. I have to be. I use the product. It's called LMNT. Rob Wolf makes
Mhm.
it. It's a
Yeah.
very high sodium, potassium, magnesium, and I recently started supplementing. Just with magnesium, just because I don't get a ton of magnesium in my diet. You can certainly get magnesium through animal products. You can get it through mackerel and salmon. It's just we just don't do a lot of that. And I think the combination of not probably doing enough seafood sources plus intense amount of running, can give you some issues. So, but rarely do I have cramps. I think more of my issue is just kind of little muscle, like little tweaks and stuff. So I always want to make sure I'm drinking plenty of water and just the salts and the
Yeah.
electrolytes.
Yeah. Do you drink plain water or do you drink salted water? How do you do that? Do you have a little bit of salt and then some water, or how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I'm just drinking plain water. I do drink, the at least a packet of the LMNT daily, so that's got the 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure how much potassium and magnesium. And then I've started, like I said, supplementing with magnesium a couple times a day.
Okay, cool. See, so I'm one of those people that does very short, sharp interviews, and I'm quite happy with what we've done. But I'm going to keep it rolling because I'm going to ask a couple of other questions,
Sure, yeah.
or talk about a couple of things, because I think we get a bit too dry and sensible when we talk about science and nutrition and health, and obviously it's a very serious subject. But one of the things I think is great about your particular presence online, and I think you should have more followers personally, is you use humor. And was that something that you just decided would be very powerful, or are you just a humorous person? Why did you decide to start doing some sort of silly sketches?
Yeah, me and my wife were just like joking around and laughing about something. I forgot exactly what it was. I think it was the nutrition guidelines, and we were going back and forth, and we're like, this is kind of funny. And like, I wonder if other people would think it was funny. And I said, what I should do is I should play like a typical dietitian. And she always plays the the consumer who's just like trying to advocate, like literally this consumer who's like, look, this isn't working for me. She embodies what I think a lot of people deal with, like
Mm,
trying to talk to their doctors and dietitians and saying like, hey, I'm trying something, like I'm trying low carb and wow, it's going really well, and the dietitian's like, oh my god, no, this won't work for you. So
yes.
trying to show kind of how ridiculous it is, and also trying to just uncover how profoundly for lack of a better word, corrupt our healthcare system is.
Yeah.
The diet, the Academy of Nutrition, to me, and when I became a dietitian, they were sponsored by Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I said, like, this is not okay. Even as before I was a low carb human, I was like, this is not okay. And I refused to be a member. You don't have to be a member of the Academy of Nutrition to be a dietitian. And then a study just came out that they're not only sponsored by, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, but they are investing in their stock. And I feel like every dietitian should be losing their mind over this. This is the definition of a conflict of interest and corruption. So we try to because obviously if you just said that, people are like, oh, that's scary and serious. But we try to make light of it so we can educate people, but we can also, like you said, use a little bit of humor. But yeah, I mean, we were literally just started by kind of messing around, and we did a video on oat milk that's probably one of my most watched videos. We got almost 100,000 views on that one.
Yeah, it's good. I think it will catch on. How are other dietitians now towards you? I mean, obviously you mentioned at the beginning they were a bit, you shouldn't be doing that. Do you feel that there's a bit of a change in that community?
No. I don't. There are a few amazing dietitians I've met. I even have a testimonial in the book, and other just people who've kind of left healthcare. Like Danny was a speech therapist who became an NTP, a natural or nutrition therapy practitioner, that are amazing. There's a couple low carb dietitians I've networked with that are just fantastic humans. But most dietitians, I get some pretty nasty messages. Indoctrination is very powerful. And I would ask anybody, like I did initially, kind of snarl back, but I don't really engage anymore online. Like, I'm not interested in getting into these fights. I'm here to just share my story and hopefully help some people. But I always say, if you ask somebody a question and they either get very defensive or they cannot answer you, you need to step away from that person. Like if I ask a dietitian and say, how many people have you got off insulin on this consistent carbohydrate diet? And they lose their mind saying, oh, well, and start, yelling at you. Like, I'm asking you a question, or have you tried a low carbohydrate diet? What do you know about this? And people are not kind. I could show you offline some messages. I've saved a few just because they're so ridiculous. I think they show. But I mean, I lived it. I went through the education, and I was indoctrinated. I was genuinely afraid, even after my health was totally destroyed, sitting in that bathtub, an ice bath. And I was afraid to try low carb because I was just so scared it would hurt my health. So I get where they're coming from. I don't get being unkind, but I get it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what we've got in common. I just want to give you two anecdotes, and I think the people that follow you that may be watching this have never seen me before. These two anecdotes I use a lot. I do a health concerns meeting at the Steak and Butter Gang every month, and I get into what you just said because Coach Raymond there also had a very high coronary artery calcium scan, so he blamed his junk diet because he came to it knowing that what he was eating was bad, and he had a score of about 700. And when he met me, I said, oh, my score was about 639. He said, oh, did you do the same thing? I went, no, I actually did the guidelines. So the common denominator wasn't the fact that we were both eating junk food, which is the main narrative. Oh, you're eating junk food, you're not eating right. The common denominator was high levels of carbohydrates. That was the first thing. But the one I want to get to is actually the one I do because I'm also a phlebotomist, so I know about bloods and stuff like that. And I get a lot of people talking about going to the doctors, and they don't believe the evidence of their own eyes. And the most common thing I say at every meeting is, do trust your experience and how you feel, because I always get once a week at least one person very distraught, and they'll say something along the lines of, I've just been to the doctor, I haven't seen him for a year, I've lost 100 pounds, my blood pressure is lower, I'm off all of my medications, I've never felt as good as this. And then my doctor says, wow, you look amazing, what are you doing? And I tell them what I'm doing, and they go, oh, that will kill you. And it's like,
I feel you. I literally was in the gym, doing exercises, and one of the coaches came up to me like, hey, my LDL is really high. Oh my God, what is that okay? Like, Once again, super healthy, feeling great,
Yes.
athletic, and the doctor freaked him out and told him he's 25, he might need a statin, and it's like, okay, let me work out. Out of my face. And as soon as I'm done, then you look through, I'm like, let me see everything. Oh, look, your A1C is like, 4.5, your triglycerides are super low. Like it's so silly that we have literally been taught to override our own intuition,
Yes.
and it's amazing. We've been taught to follow a way of eating that is completely unnatural to humans. Humans did not evolve eating Pop Tarts and cereal.
Yes.
And then we've been told that the foods that nourished us and our grandparents and their grandparents, these high fat, high meats, very, very easy to digest, bioavailable things. That's my favorite narrative. People are like, oh, it's inflammatory. I'm like, if meat was inflammatory, the human race would not exist. Like,
Absolutely.
once again, these are things I feel like my 6-year-old niece could figure out. Like, yeah, we would not be alive. This is how humans evolve. This is not debatable. This is like evolutionary science. Like, we can pull out paper. Like, people who want to debate that, like, you can't talk to them because there's no, they're silly and they're not willing to look at actual like reality. But yeah, I get that all the time. And
Mm.
unfortunately, and of course there is a flip side. If you have extremely high LDL, but you're also consuming, very high amounts of carbohydrates, and we're not talking junk food, like you said. It could be, I eat tons of rice, and I know a lot of runners who've had heart problems and type 2 diabetes. So it really comes down, or at least in my experience, it comes down to that. It's people who are eating a lot of processed carbohydrates mostly, and then whole food
Seed
carbohydrates
oils. Yeah.
on top of that. And then you and I could talk for a long time, I'm sure, about this narrative that we need to eat less meat. Meat is bad for you. And I can't tell you how many people I saw in the hospital setting, especially, and not even old. I was going to say old, but I'm talking like, I mean, I'm almost 40. I'm talking like 45, 50, that just were so overly fat and under
Mm.
muscled. They have this whole world telling them eat less meat. So what are they doing? Okay, well, I'll have toast and I'll have cereal and I'll have pasta. And you just get these people with just this muscle wasting. And that's going to be a huge problem. I mean, it's already a huge problem, sarcopenia. But I worry
Yeah.
about this younger generation that doesn't want to move and wants to, complain and fuck around on their phone and, eat fake meat. I'm like, oh Lord, y'all are going to be in trouble. So yeah, there's a lot of things in this world that concern me.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I was told at 23, I was told by a doctor who showed me a very convincing image of my hip that I would be in a wheelchair by the time I'm 50.
Oh, Lord.
Um, yeah, I'm 58 now, and I was nowhere near that. And I think people get very scared, and I also hear a lot of remarks like that. About when I said it as a sort of humorous thing, that the doctor said, "Oh, that will kill you." They mean it when they say that. They're really trying to scare that person, even though they look much healthier and they feel great. And I find that very disconcerting, that we've lost our intuitiveness about our own health, and it is absolutely following a narrative, which is very dangerous. But anyway, Michelle, I'm not going to leave it on that. I'm going to say to everybody at the end of this video, I will put one of your comedy sketches on, and hope people
Nice. I
join
appreciate
you
that.
on Instagram. But I thought, if you ever want somebody to take part, if you need another person to play another role, I'll gladly do it for you, and be anything you want, because I just feel humor is the way to go, because it is actually laughable. It is actually laughable because, I'll put occasionally a picture out of the local farm with all the animals out there. And then I'll find a picture of a monocropped, plastic covered, pesticide ridden place, and apparently that's the healthy one. And it just
Yeah.
ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous, and that's what you're getting across. And I hope people look at your book, and also I like what you're doing with the protein project, which I don't
Thank
know if you
you.
just want to put a tag on the end of this just to tell people what that is, and then maybe we'll wrap up.
Yeah, sure. So, my goal is to try to raise money for people dealing with food insecurity. Unfortunately, although, food banks and programs like Meals on Wheels, like, they have the best intentions, but any federal program they have to follow the guidelines. So they're often, people are given these very highly processed food, high carbohydrate meals. And so my goal is just to get more meat, more animal protein to people in need. Just trying to help people heal with meat. Because I feel like the last thing I like to say is, I feel like too, as a society, we've kind of accepted the subpar level of health. So many people that are young are struggling already. Depression in the US is the number one cause. I think it might be worldwide now. It's the number one cause of disability, right? And so the fact that we can heal, the body and the brain have a profound capacity to heal, a profound, greater than anyone has ever allowed you to believe, but we have to feed it right. Every species has a species specific diet. And I would say anybody struggling, with physical issues or, emotional, mental issues, being willing to give and change, change your diet, give it a try, could be one of the most profound things that you do.
Excellent. And I take my hat off to you because I think it's brilliant what you're doing. So that's really great. So
Thank
Michelle,
you.
thank you very much. Thank you so much for attending this. It's been really great.
Anytime. Thank you.
That just came out.
Yeah, I was looking over it, and I try to really pay attention to what I eat, and I eat a ton of beef, and I know that beef has like folate, right?
Yes.
And obviously it's a great source of protein.
True.
Okay. It has like really good sources of iron.
That's true as well.
Okay. So how is it possible that beef is rated lower for you than like Lucky Charms? Like it's saying Lucky Charms is better for you.
It's true. Lucky Charms is better for you. So give me 1 second to look at this can. It's a source of healthy whole grains.
Lucky Charms.
Yes.
So I'm supposed to eat Lucky Charms instead of beef.
They're magically delicious.
Oh my gosh. And some water.
Actually, would you rather have some orange juice fortified with calcium? That's actually better for you than ground beef too.
Thank you for watching the video. That's really much appreciated. And I've now selected one of these videos for you, which is one of my more popular videos. And there's also one here that you might find interesting. The other thing you can do is smash me in the face if you want to subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe